We're picking up here where we left off in the last session. David was king, and we saw some of the great things David accomplished as king. He was a warrior, a very natural, skilled warrior, and he finished a lot of the work that Joshua was supposed to finish and couldn't do. And he did some amazing things as king, a great man of faith. And the other kings of Israel and Judah, many of them are measured against David. This such and such a king was, he was a good king, but his heart wasn't quite like David's heart. Or this other king was a terrible king, not at all like David. And David is sort of the standard for these other kings. So David's life just wasn't easy. He spent a good portion of it running for his life and hiding from Saul, living in caves, just trying to stay alive. And then after he became king, he had some great times, but he had some terrible times as well. He had several wives and therefore quite a few children. One of his children, one of his boys, was completely, I was going to say madly in love, but more lustful, after one of David's daughters by a different wife, and ended up raping her. Well, the girl's blood brother, same mother, her brother killed the other son, and there was murder going on within the family. One of his children, Absalom, rose up to try to take the kingdom away from David. He started a big rebellion, and David never ran away from a fight. But here, David can't bring himself to kill his own son. He refuses to do it, and he runs from battle. And he just takes his army, and they leave Jerusalem, and basically hand the kingdom over to his son. Well, his men are still putting down this rebellion, and his son Absalom is killed in the uprising, in that battle that ensues. And David grieves and grieves. It seems like he never really fully gets over that death. Meanwhile, he has another son, Adoniah, and Adoniah is next in line to be the king. Adoniah sort of invites a whole bunch of key figures to a big party where the people declare him to be the king, and he takes the throne, but he's in a different part of Jerusalem. David finds out about it, and specifically Nathan and Bathsheba find out and approach David, and David is forced to take quick action because David had promised that Solomon would be the next king. Well, why would David do that? And why would Adoniah feel the need to take the throne? And it's because, I believe, this is me interpreting here, and this isn't something written that I'm aware of in Scripture, but what I am convinced happened is that David felt so horrible just all the time for what he did to Bathsheba. Their child that was born to that adulterous relationship didn't live. The child died. But David married Bathsheba, had another son with her. That was Solomon. And I think he basically was saying, I can't ever make up to you what I've done to you, but I'll do what I can. And one of the things I can do is make your son, Solomon, the next king. And Solomon was way down there in the rank, particularly from birth order. He really had no cultural right to the throne, but David just said, no, Solomon will be king. There's no other explanation for that I can find that really satisfies me. So Adoniah felt the need to rise up and take the kingdom before David died and Solomon became the next king. Well, when this happened, David reacted and said, okay, we have to do this right now. And he very, very quickly established another party in Jerusalem where Solomon was pronounced the official king. David was renouncing the throne and passing it on to his son Solomon. And the people at Adoniah's party heard about this and realized, well, we're in big trouble. If Solomon finds out we're here, he's going to have us killed. So they desert Adoniah. Adoniah and a few officials are left there. Solomon approaches them, and Adoniah just begs and pleads for his life. Solomon says, very graciously, actually, given what was happening, Solomon says, I won't kill you. I'm going to let you live, but I'll be watching you very closely. And if you even sneeze the wrong way, then that's it for you. I'll kill you. And Adoniah just is thankful just for his life. So Solomon takes the throne. David dies. Before David died, we read about him that he got old and he was cold. He could not stay warm no matter what happened. And so we're picking up in 1 Kings. And if you're following along in Scripture, we've finished up the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel. And those two books were actually one large book, just Samuel. But it's a long book. The words were all written in scrolls. The scrolls got really big, so they would cut the scrolls at a certain time, and you'd have two scrolls, so 1st and 2nd Samuel. Well, it's the same with Kings and the same with Chronicles. And all three sets of books are pretty much following the same narrative. Samuel and Kings sort of continue one right into the other. Chronicles goes back a little bit before the book of Kings begins in the chronology and picks up with Saul around the time of Samuel. We get some other historical information, genealogies, such things like that. But then Chronicles picks up and follows primarily what happens in Jerusalem and with the tribe of Judah in particular, where the books of Kings follow, there's a civil war coming and the nation splits. So the book of Kings follows both nations. But we'll get to that. All right, so we're in the book of Kings now. David was old, advanced in age. They covered him with clothes, but he could not keep warm. So David's servants said to him, I know how we can keep him warm. Let's go find a beautiful young woman and bring her to the king so that they can lie together and surely she'll keep the king warm. Well, they searched for a beautiful woman and they found from a place called Shunem, Abishag. So the girl's name was Abishag and she was a Shunammite. Shunammite is a synonym of a Shulamite. Let's just file that one away for later. Well, they brought her to the king. The king was very beautiful, and she became the king's nurse and served him, but the king did not cohabit with her, meaning the king never had intercourse with Abishag, and therefore she would not be considered one of the king's wives or concubines, and that becomes important here. Well, Adoniah rose up and claimed the kingdom. Nathan the prophet found out about it. Nathan and Bathsheba approached David. David does everything we just talked about. He establishes Solomon as king, and things are going okay. David has to take Solomon aside and give him some advice and really give him some sort of last-minute training to be king. And a lot of it is very political. A lot of it is bloody. You got to, this person was good to me, but I don't trust him. You shouldn't trust him either. Keep him in your sights and kill him if you have to. Dr. Bill Creasy talks about this part of scripture here and says if you want to understand David, watch The Godfather. And I think there's some validity to that. David is instructing Solomon, here's who you got to kill, here's who you can trust, here's everything you need to know to be a king, be strong, and just giving Solomon as much advice as he can. Well, David died, and sometime later, Adoniah, who lost the kingdom, Adoniah came to Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, and she said, do you come peacefully? He said, yes, I come peacefully. And he said, I have something to say. She said, all right, go ahead. Adoniah said, you know that the kingdom was mine, and that all Israel expected for me to be king. However, the kingdom is turned about, and it is my brother's. It was from the Lord, and I'm sure he says that a little bit sarcastically. He says, I'm making just one request of you. Do not refuse me. She says, go ahead. And he says this, please speak to Solomon the king, for he will not refuse you, that he may give me Abishag the Shunammite as a wife. Bathsheba said, very well, I will speak to the king for you. Now, that little note about David not sleeping with Abishag becomes really important here. If David slept with her, then she would be considered a concubine or even a wife of David. And if Adoniah married her or slept with her or anything with her, it would be a severe threat to the throne for Solomon. It would be a statement, a very bold statement saying, I am taking our father's wives. I'm taking his woman, and you can't do anything to stop me. She's mine, and the throne is mine. Right? The two would go together. And we've seen similar things before in Scripture, where sleeping with somebody who is your father's woman says the father is not able to lead us, I'm in charge. Well, a very similar thing would happen here. But since David did not sleep with her, and this was apparently common knowledge, then Abishag was fair game. There's absolutely no threat to the throne. It's not any sort of a statement about trying to take the throne back from Solomon. It has nothing to do with the throne. I think Adoniah really just is crazy about her. She's gorgeous. They probably, knew each other from being in the palace and stuff together. And he just wanted to marry her. And he just kind of says, if Solomon will let me marry her, we'll go off and have a nice house in the suburbs, and won't be a threat. He'll never have to worry about me again. Bathsheba is smart, and she knows what would and would not be a threat to the kingdom, to the throne, and she's okay with this. Solomon also knows that there's no threat here, but when Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, asks Solomon, Adoniah would like to marry Abishag, Solomon flips out, absolutely flips out, and goes way overboard and says, and you even dare to approach me with this? What are you thinking, Mom? What else is he going to ask for? Why don't you just hand him the whole kingdom? Why don't you just give him the throne? And he ends up saying, that's it, he's crossed the line, I'm killing him. And he does. He goes and has Adoniah killed. So Solomon, at this one request that really was not any threat at all to his throne, flips out and has Adoniah killed. Why? Right? Was he just in a bad mood? He didn't have coffee that day, and maybe that was part of it, but I think there's a lot more to it than that. If you flip over, Solomon, among other things, he was an extremely wise person. God gave him incredible wisdom, incredible wealth, and Solomon was also an artist. And he wrote a lot of proverbs, and he wrote a lot of songs and poems. The greatest of these is the Song of Solomon, or Solomon's Song of Songs. So the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. Now this is, some things in the Bible are not appropriate for children, so use discretion here. But I'm going to open up to Song of Solomon, and I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I want to highlight a few odds and ends here. All right, so Song of Solomon starts out, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. May he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. For your love is better than wine. Your oils have a pleasing fragrance. Your name is like purified oil. Therefore the maidens love you. And what you need to know about this song is that the song is written as a conversation. There's a girl and there's a guy. There are some friends here and there that kind of jump in, and it's written in that form of a conversation. So this is the woman talking. May he kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love, Solomon. And love there, the word love in English, it's a little misleading. There are several different words in Greek and Hebrew that get translated love. And one of the words is Ahava. Ahava is a general word for love that's similar to the way we generally use the word love in English, right? I love my wife. I love my children. I also love ice hockey. I love tacos. Right? It's this whole range of meanings there. And that's similar to the word Ahava. Another word that's used very frequently in Song of Songs is the word dode. And dode is passionate love, sexual love. Very strong word in that sense. When the woman here says, your love is better than wine, she says, your dode is better than wine. Your sexual, passionate love is better than wine. And there are things in Song of Solomon that the translators I don't think they really could bring themselves to say what the actual Hebrew writes, what's actually written there. In some cases they do, in some cases they don't, and now and then there are words that could be translated 3 or 4 ways, and they take like the safest possible translation when that doesn't really necessarily fit the context. So They are talking to each other, the woman and the man here, the woman and Solomon, and she says, where are you? Tell me where I can find you. And he answers, and then they start describing each other. Your cheeks are lovely with ornaments, your neck with strings of jewels. We will make for you ornaments of gold, studded with silver. Well, the way she's described, she probably is not a very rich, wealthy woman. So where would she get all these beautiful jewels and ornaments? Right? Probably gifts from Solomon. Well, she starts talking back and says, when the king was on his couch, and we'll see that word again a few sentences later, and we find out that the couch is actually like leaves. They're outside, out in a beautiful open field. So the king was on his couch. My nard gave forth fragrance. My beloved is to me a sachet of myrrh that lies between my breasts. My beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms in the vineyards of En-gedi. Behold, you are beautiful, my love. You are beautiful, truly delightful. So, sounds like he's pretty comfortable there, just, lying there, spending the night between her breasts. Behold, you are beautiful, my beloved, truly beautiful. Our couch is green. They're outdoors. Our beams, the beams of our house, are cedar. The rafters are pine. I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys, a lily among brambles. He answers, you're like a lily among brambles, right? This beautiful flower among all the other ugly flowers, comparing her to all the other women. So is my love, you, among the young women. And she answers, as an apple tree is among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men. With great delight I sat in his shadow. And delight is a word meaning pleasure, deep pleasure, like life-changing pleasure. With great pleasure I sat in his shadow. His fruit was sweet to my taste. The word taste means your mouth or your palate. His fruit was sweet to my mouth. And what fruit would that be? You can use your imagination there. Well, he brought me into the banqueting house. Banqueting house in Hebrew literally is wine house. Some translations would say that. Sustain me with raisins. Also, some translations, instead of raisins, it's either raisin cakes, or King James and some other translations will say a big flask of wine. Refresh me with apples, for I am sick with love. And that's the general word, Ahava. I'm sick with love. And then she describes what they're doing together. His left hand is under my head. His right hand embraces me. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles of the does of the field, that you not stir up or awaken love, that's Ahava, the general love, until it pleases. And apparently she's saying, and right now it pleases, because it certainly looks like she's enjoying this. Well, they describe each other. Another scene comes by, and they start describing each other again. Arise, my love, my beautiful one, and come away. My dove in the clefts of the rock, on the crannies of the cliff. Let me see your face. Let me hear your voice. And she's kind of crying out to him. They keep calling each other beloved. My beloved, she says, is mine, and I am his. And the word beloved is dodi. When you add an I or the E sound at the end of a word, it's dod with an I at the end. So dod is that sexual love, that passionate physical love. And dodi would be my sexual love. Basically, it means my lover. So when you read my beloved, it's literally my lover, my dodi. Turn, my beloved, be like a gazelle. On my bed at night, I caught him whom my soul loves. I sought him, but found him not. I will rise. And she ends up going out looking for him. She wakes up and just needs to have him right there. And we get a little glimpse of all that. At one point, they start describing each other's bodies. And the woman is describing him. his head, his eyes, his cheeks, his lips. And you get the sense, the head, the eyes, the cheeks, the lips, the arms, the body, the legs. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as the cedars, right? Lebanon, huge, strong trees. When the text says his body is polished ivory, that's one of those words that it could be translated a few ways. It could be abdomen. It could be the general word body, like they have here. It could also be the male reproductive organ, and that's one of the ways that particular Hebrew word is used pretty often. And that makes a whole lot more sense here. His body is polished ivory. And, they're describing each other's bodies. Well, here, they've kind of done this whole thing once before and describing this beautiful lovemaking scene, and he says, you are a lily among the brambles, you stand out from all the other women. Here he says, yeah, there are 60 queens and 80 concubines and virgins without number, but you, my lover, you are the one that I want. So yeah, there are young women. They saw you. They called you blessed. The queens and concubines even praised you. Right. So here we get to where Solomon has been reigning for a while. Some time has gone by. He's married. We'll find out that Solomon ends up marrying 700 different women and has 300 concubines on top of that. And at first it was just like this, really enjoyable fling that the two of them had. And then as he gets older and builds marriage alliances with other nations and other groups of people and finds other women he's attracted to and brings them in as concubines, well, she is just sort of one among many now. And in this whole scene, he's kind of saying, well, yeah, there are lots and lots of other women. I mean, a lot of women, but you are the one who just outshines them all. And her friends jump in now and then saying, how is he different from any other man? Right? A real scathing critique and even warning to her. Well, the reason that I bring up this whole section here is that within Song of Solomon, this woman who is having this really wild, passionate love affair with Solomon, and they're crazy about each other, this woman is described as a Shulamite. She's a woman from Shulam. Well, if you remember, Shulam is a synonym of Shunem, a Shunammite. Why did Solomon flip out when his brother asked for the hand of Abishag in marriage? Right. So Adoniah says, "All I want is to marry Abishag, and I'll go away, live in the suburbs, and won't bother you ever again." And Solomon flips out and has him killed. Right. It's completely irrational. It's because Solomon, he just became king, and here his brother, who tried to take the throne from him, comes and asks him for the Shulamite girl, who he's been having this wild fling with, and he's like, no, he's not getting her. He wants to even think about her. I'll kill him. So it's all about a girl, right? Solomon's reaction is all about that girl, Abishag. Well, Solomon also wrote a lot of other things. First Kings tells us that he wrote over 1,000 songs and something like 3,000 proverbs, if I remember right. We've seen some of the Psalms going through David's life and get a feel for what some of the Psalms are like. Solomon wrote Proverbs, and he had a lot more Proverbs than this, and this particular book of Proverbs was probably edited later on and added to by other people, but it starts out as Solomon's book of Proverbs. So we begin the Proverbs of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instruction, to discern sayings of understanding, to receive instruction in wise behavior, righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the naive, to the youth knowledge and discretion. A man will hear and increase in learning, and a man of understanding will acquire wise counsel, to understand a proverb and a figure, the words of the wise and their riddles. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. Hear, my son, your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. And he goes on and gives these proverbs. Well, a couple things to point out. The proverbs are not meant to be like if you do this, then this will happen, as far as like a guarantee or a rule about life. And you kind of see that, you see things worded that way in the Torah. If you keep these laws, you'll be blessed. If you break these laws, you'll be cursed. And if you do this, then here's the consequence. But Proverbs isn't meant to be like that. It's more like guidelines for life. If you're honest in business, your business will do well. And it's not saying that every single person who is honest in business will always do well. There are great, honest business people who really struggle and go out of business. But as a generalization, when you're honest in business, you have a good reputation, people trust you, you get clients. So that's really more what Proverbs is about. But why did Solomon write down the Proverbs? And I suspect it was toward the end of his life. And he says, "Hear, my son, your father's instruction." Well, Solomon, if he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, he probably had more than one son. He probably had a whole lot of sons. So which son is he talking about? Well, it would be the one who probably is firstborn, who's in line to be heir to the throne. He is writing this to his son who will be king after him, and in hopes that his son will have that wisdom. Well, why would Solomon be concerned about that? Well, flip over to Ecclesiastes. It's another poem, poem that Solomon wrote, and he wrote this probably also toward the end of his life, looking back on things. And all his life he's a very wise person. God gave him incredible wisdom. Wise people ask a lot of hard questions. And Solomon, for years, had been asking, what is life really about? What brings fulfillment? What makes life worth living? And that's really the question Ecclesiastes is asking. And he tells us all the things that he tried, right? Just thinking about life, what is life about? Life is meaningless. And I can't find any rational explanation or other explanation for what makes life meaningful or worth living other than the Lord. And that's really the gist of this whole book. And he talks about wisdom and this great wisdom that God has given him and all these things that he did with that wisdom. And without the Lord, it's useless, he says. And he talked about pleasure of possessions. He had all the pleasures and all the possessions he could possibly imagine. He was extremely wealthy. And he finally says, having stuff is nice, but then what happens? I get old, I prepare to die, and I hand it all to my son, he may even squander the whole thing. It talks about wealth. And yeah, I have wealth, and then my son inherits it. And I don't know if he even is wise enough to keep track of the inheritance. So why write Proverbs? To try desperately to get your son to listen to your wisdom and to be wise so that when he inherits all these possessions and this kingdom, that he doesn't blow it. So that's the gist of Ecclesiastes. He tried having great wealth. He tried, what else? Sex whenever he wanted it. He talks about that, having all the women he could possibly ever want, sex, drugs, rock and roll, possessions, wealth, beautiful mansion, like what you name it, he tried it. And his conclusion was, it's just everything is meaningless. Could some of it's fun for a little while and then it's just not, and there's nothing has meaning without the Lord. So the sort of conclusion that he reaches in this whole thing is that there is one more book of literature that's grouped together here, and that's the book of Job. So we've talked about Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon. Now the book of Job. People have different reactions toward Job and different understandings. The gist of the book of Job is this: the devil, called Satan, but Satan is not actually his name, it's his title. It means the accuser or the adversary. In Hebrew, it's ha-satan. And ha, the H sound in front of a word, is the. So it's the Satan, literally. And it's the accuser, the adversary. Well, he approached God, and he's bragging about all this destruction he's trying to cause, and God, for whatever reason, said, "Have you considered my servant Job?" I mean, he's been extremely faithful. And he's basically saying, there are people, Satan, who just follow me because they love me. And take Job, for instance. And Satan says, oh, yeah, you think you've given him all this stuff, you've made him wealthy, you've blessed him, of course he loves you. You take all that stuff away, he'll curse you to your face. And the Lord says, all right, all his stuff is in your control now. And, it's interesting. God just gives Satan certain control, but with restrictions. And there were 2 rounds of this. Well, meanwhile, we meet Job. He's described as a righteous man. He has 7 children, 7 sons, I believe it was. And 7 sons, 3 daughters. He had all sorts of possessions. He was extremely wealthy. And he was very faithful to God. And the devil came. God allowed the devil to step in and take everything from him. His children were killed. His property was all destroyed. His servants were killed or taken as slaves. Everything he had was just stripped away, and just all in a moment. And Job fell on his knees and he started grieving and mourning. A very appropriate response there. But he also said, I came into this world naked. I'll leave the world with nothing. The Lord gives, the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Well, the next time the Satan shows up, God says, hey, he did pretty well there, huh? And Satan says, well, yeah, but he still has his health. Take that away, and that's it. He's done. So God says, all right, his health is in your hands, but don't kill him. So Satan then goes and afflicts Job with sores all over his body, head to toe, very painful sores. It hurts him to stand, it hurts him to sit, it hurts him to lie down, and he's miserable. And his wife is even there telling him, just curse God and die. And, very supportive. Well, 3 of Job's friends come, a 4th one later on shows up. But these 3 friends, they just sit with Job silently, and it's the best thing they can do, really. They're just sitting there with Job, keeping him company. They're not expecting him to talk. They're not trying to talk to him. But when Job finally starts talking, their theology comes out. So these 3 friends start saying, Job, why don't you just confess your sin and die? And Job says, but I haven't sinned. Well, here's the thinking. Mentioned just a little while ago in the Torah, if you do this, you'll be blessed. If you do this, you'll be cursed, right? You do the righteous thing, you'll be blessed. You sin, you'll be cursed. Job, obviously you're being cursed, and therefore you've sinned. So confess your sin and just get it over with. And Job keeps saying, but I didn't sin. I've done nothing wrong. I've done nothing to deserve this. And this goes back and forth for a good portion of the book. And finally, Job starts saying, you know what? If God allows this, then if you think I've sinned, then just let's have a trial. Bring God here and let him accuse me of my sin. And Job kind of starts blaming God. And that was the worldview, right? The devil did all this stuff to Job, but God allowed it, and God is in control, so therefore God is responsible. But they're having this back and forth where Job sort of starts, I don't know if the word is blaming God, accusing God of injustice, but saying, God is letting this happen, and I don't deserve it, and let's do this. So eventually, God himself enters into this conversation, never actually answers Job's questions. Why is this happening to me? Why is God allowing this? I've never sinned, so God, why are you doing this? God never answers his questions. He just asks Job questions. Job, you think you understand all this? And you're talking to your friends as though you're like a theology expert now, and you are the judge. So tell me, where were you when the world was created? Right? Did you do that? Did you fill the earth with water? Did you create these great creatures to live on the earth? Were you there when this happened? And obviously, the implied answer is no. It's a rhetorical question. And God basically asked these questions to say to Job, Job, you have no idea what happens behind the scenes. I do. And stop putting yourself in the place of judge, because you barely know anything that's really happening around you. And that's pretty much how the book ends. Job God restores Job's wealth, gives Job more children, and you can't ever replace children who have died. But God brings Job into this sort of new time of blessing. You can still grieve what he had before, but it's this new period of blessing, and that's the book, right? One big question comes up: were these real events? People in the Bible do talk about a man named Job. They talk about Job as a real person. I kind of see it more as like, when there's a movie based on a true story, right? There's a lot of artistic liberties there. I definitely do not think that it happened the way it's written historically. I don't think that's meant to be history at all. One of the reasons I say that is this: imagine I get really sick, I end up in the hospital, and I'm hooked up to all the tubes. My whole body is in pain constantly. You come in to visit me and see how I'm doing, and we don't talk for a while. And then when we finally start to have a conversation, everything we say rhymes perfectly, right? It just wouldn't happen, right? I'm not going to be thinking in poetry while I'm lying there feeling half dead. It's just not going to happen. And the book of Job, almost the entire thing is written in Hebrew poetry. And it's not rhyme. There wasn't rhyme in Hebrew poetry the way we have it in English. But, there was rhyme, but that's not a common form of poetry that they used. Right? But it was written in poetic form. It would be as though Job just started talking and arguing theologically with his friends in perfect Hebrew poetry. It just wouldn't happen that way. So it's very clearly a poem. It's a work of art with all the artistic liberties that would go with it. But it does raise very real questions that people were having. People were saying, I've read the Proverbs. I get that they're not hard, fast rules. They're more like it's advice, guidance. But I've also read the Torah, and both say, if I'm honest in business, my business will flourish. And look at me, I'm honest in business. I've always been honest in business, and I can't keep up. I don't have enough food to feed my family. My next door neighbor is corrupt, and he's doing everything the Torah says not to do. And look at him, he's thriving. And the book of Job, that poem, is asking questions about this very topic. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why don't the promises of the Torah always hold true every time? Why do the good people suffer? Why do the bad people prosper? And Job is an attempt at wrestling through some of those deeper questions. All right, so that's a glimpse of Hebrew poetry. In the next session, we're going to get back to King Solomon and find out how he did in his reign as king.